Hello, I am Madeline James, and welcome to a bit of an interlude in my world building guide series for building the cultures and societies for our realistic fictional worlds. We are going to be establishing the regional societal story scenarios that we are going to use going forward. I know that sounds a bit confusing. So moving forward into more cultural and societal world building topics, it is going to be far too difficult to do this at a across the globe scale where we're looking at every individual society and culture and trying to map that out like that. I don't think that's the way this type of world building should be done. I don't think it would give us the level of depth that we really need to kind of show how this process is supposed to work and work through it all. So what we've done is come up with a few stories that we would write in this world, and then what settings they're going to be in, and then we will build scenarios for societies and cultures around those. And then also we're going to do some that are more from the world building perspective of like we're doing world first, story comes after, right? Like the story is inspired by the world, whereas the first set is going to be the world is inspired by the story and what needs to fit. I think those are kind of the two big approaches. I tend to lean towards the story and then world approach, but I've gone a little bit both ways, and I don't think it's like you have to be all this way or all this way. So if you saw the live stream that we did recently, we came up with these scenarios together. We came up with two which were kind of story-led, where we came up with the stories and then figured out where in the world we wanted to place them and what kind of requirements we have. And then as we move forward with the world building, we'll kind of make choices based off what matches the story. And then we had one that was more like, let's pick an interesting place in the world, let's lead from there, and we'll kind of go the opposite direction where we'll come up with something for the world building first and then fit it into the story. And then I did actually come up with a fourth one, which we did not go over before, so this is a surprise for those of you in the stream, but I wanted another example, and this one is going to be entirely world building led. We're not going to have a story right now at all. Eventually we'll start coming up with like hints of it, right, as we go further in world building, but there's no story associated with it at all right now. It is just world building based. We use the final Middle Age era maps for where we're starting these scenarios in, right, which I think I covered before that was my plan. But you should be able to move forward with this guide series regardless of which era you're working with. But yeah, even though we covered this in a live stream, I wanted a short, sweet video just to kind of cover them so that everyone can be on the same page moving forward. We can have something nice and neat to come back and reference. And yeah, let's get into these scenarios. Okay, so let's get into it. So here you can see a map. I sort of cropped the side just so that it could be a little bit bigger. But you can sort of see some of the major continents, and I have circled the locations where our scenarios are going to be located. So the first one is down in this sort of like peninsula region of Cellar, which, if you recall, is the continent that at this time has just kind of recently been discovered and habitated. 2 is going to be in this part down here of Wycombe, and then we have 2 in Thurston. 3 and then 4, and 4 is the new one that I came up with, which we'll get into more, but let's step through these one by one. They're very fun. Okay, so first we have Cyberpunk 1477 is what we named this scenario, or this story, right? And so the setting, again, is this peninsula in Cellar. I sort of pulled some of the maps here just to kind of give a general idea, but I kind of took notes of everything from the maps we have so far that might be relevant going forward. This is a temperate oceanic climate. It's CFB. It is going to be predominantly broadleaf mixed forest, tropical deciduous forests, great. It is also sitting kind of around some glaciated archipelagos. So when we get into the like regional world building parts where I'm building out like the more specific maps, that's going to be really fun to play with. And then also for the history, this was a region that like originally fractured from the original empire that settled and discovered this part of Cellar. So there's not really any competition for them. There's no limits to the land. So once they get going, they have a lot of rapid expansion. So we're going to be kind of set on a city here, and I'll go into the details more in a little bit. But yeah, I also noted some of the main resources that we're going to find here. So diamonds, jade, gold, a lot of good fishing. Then in terms of domesticable animals, they'd have cattle, pigs or water buffalo, horses, and then obviously a lot of wood because it's forests. So that's what we have here. So then getting into the story, and the little like subtitle for Cyberpunk 1477 is The Clerk and the Aspirant. But yes, this story is going to be Middle Ages cyberpunk, which is interesting. It is going to be a smaller scope, smaller scale world, probably within a single city. The society that we need based on this is going to be very highly urbanized, very stratified. That kind of comes with writing cyberpunk. It's going to be a Renaissance-esque kind of time period, so late Middle Ages going into the Renaissance. We're going to have Magitech guild colonies, and there's going to be some early capitalism in here. So our main plot for this story, and just to note again, we're not actually writing these stories. This is just, I want to give this as an example of how to world build around a story, right? And this is the story for this setting, scenario. But the main plot is that we have two characters at odds with a magic guild-dominated society that end up connected to an organization in their efforts to take down a particularly corrupt guild leadership / council, and then they discover that the problem is actually bigger than they thought, right? And there's going to be this thing here where they're more trying for starting, like they're not going to see the world they want to create, but they have to be one of the cogs kind of forcing it in that direction, which kind of leans into those themes of cyberpunk. And then there's also going to be a side plot of the B-plot romance, The Clerk and the Aspirant, right, between the two, and then there's going to be some found family vibes. So getting into this a little more, we have two main characters, obviously, our clerk or servant within a wealthy guild. I won't go through all of this, but basically they realize they're part of a system of oppression and have to deal with that hopelessness. They're going to be debt-bound to a guild, so we're going to have to build out those parts of the society, right? And then we have a failed aspirant into the guild, and they are rejected, and they're very obsessed with honor and glory, so they have to learn to let go of that and strive for something more selfless. And then we have some other characters they're going to work with, I guess sort of the found family. We have a guild contractor, aka mercenary, and we have a Magitech savant, ex-heir of the guild they're trying to take down, and they were disowned by an older sibling. I don't know how much those will really matter from world building, because we're already going to have all those groups, but that's what we have. So then, based off this, the organizations or other players that we need to sort of build out are going to be this Magitech guild in the system, another guild that's secretly influencing them, a betrayer or saboteur from the guild, aristocrats and elites, internal secret service, and organized crime group / gangs. So we're going to have to kind of build up all of that, and that's going to be a big purpose or focus in the world building for this, right? Is that we're going to need to really build out those organizations, the way they interact with each other, the way things are changing, right? That's going to be really important for this story in particular. So let's move on to story number 2. This is The Demon Made Me Do It, which is great. So this is going to be in the southeast jungle of Wycombe, which you can see like over here. This is all rainforest. It's going to be a larger, more epic scale world for the story. So it's an empire or kingdom with a lot of sub-regions. So that's a lot more that we have to build a little bit further out, right? This is going to be, again, it's set in a tropical rainforest. There's probably going to be iron, zinc, and lead, pigs and water buffalo, lots of wood, obviously. And then what we have for our history notes that we've built out before, this is kind of the democratic and bureaucratically settled groups. There was a large empire developing in the rainforest, building platforms to raise settlements above the ground. And that's what we kind of had before. So then getting into the story, this is a wuxia style story. We already mentioned larger epic scale world. So for the society, the notes that we have is it's going to be an honor-based society with supernatural spirits or demons of some form. And again, we're using terminology here that within actually world building, creating this, we would replace with more specific terminology. This is just kind of like the trope / inspiration terms, right? Like spirit, demon, and will probably have its own name. It's also going to be a martial arts-based society focused on self-improvement, code of honor, chivalric romance. There's going to be this concept of chi powers that could be more witch-like. And then we might go with like a Sino-Tibetan inspo for an introductory conlang or naming language for the kind of key concepts and names. I don't know if we're actually going to do that as part of this, but like that's kind of what we do. And then so the main plot is we have a character that makes a deal with a demon supernatural being to learn a special language to tap into ancient chi powers so that they can challenge the shadow puppeteer of an incompetent ruler in exchange for helping the demon on a mission of redemption. So some of the notes we have with this is that they can meditate to suppress the demon, but they get powers from the demon if they don't, so there's that like conflict. And so part of this journey is they're going to travel through various regions, hence the larger scale world building, while seeking individuals for the demon to seek redemption from, or, you know, go places where they can achieve their redemption, while the main character is being taught and is leveling up in their skills so that they can eventually take down the puppeteer. So these side plots, we have obviously the mystery about the demon. What are their true motivations? Can I trust them? There's going to be some ambiguity on what the demon is and what they're after. So maybe the demon has to like split their demon part out. Who knows? Maybe they're more like a guardian angel that's been corrupted. Who knows? And then obviously some side plots there with that on like the moral ambiguity and not having a clear-cut good and evil would be a bit of a theme with it. So our main characters, we have a martial artist or a chi specialist in training. So they're kind of stories that after their master wouldn't teach them something or let them take on a challenge, the student is going to set off on their own on their mission to challenge the shadow puppeteer of the incompetent ruler. Their internal arc is just kind of that internal growth arc that will parallel the skill leveling up. And again, we know what their goal is. So the demon or supernatural being is an expert in a special language with ancient chi powers. Their internal arc must seek redemption from those they have wronged and learn to forgive themselves and split their evil part out, right? We never specified whether or not this would be like a weird romance plot. It could be. I don't know. I mean, I like everything to have some romance in it. So like if I was actually writing this, it'd be a romance. Or not a romance, but there would be romance with it, you know? But other organizations and players we need to develop. We need to build out the organization and culture around the studying of martial arts and how chi works. We need to build up the political parts of the leader in the empire, or the emperor and their puppeteer. There'll be various entities that the demon needs redemption from, so we'll need to build out that history, all those mechanics, who all those people are. That'll probably have to get into like needs and goals and wants of these different places throughout this empire. Develop the subregions that they'll journey through. And then there'll probably be some form of like antagonistic organization they run into a lot. So like goons or thugs, maybe some sort of like anti-demon or demon worshipping bandits, right? To add conflict as they're journeying about. But yeah, so that's The Demon Made Me Do It, which definitely has a lot of cultural world building that needs to be done to make this work. And my goal with this is for none of these to play directly into direct real world cultural inspiration. Obviously, all of these kind of do have a hint of that, right? This one especially. But the goal when world building it, for our purposes here, would be to really branch out from that and to come up with something quite different, even though there's obviously a starting thread here, which I think is fine. So, scenario 3 is, whose city is it anyway? Okay, so this is going to be set on the volcanic islands south of Thurston, which are also rainforest. However, they've kind of been deforested. There's going to be, again, there's volcanoes, so it's like volcanic, lots of fertile soil, and you're going to have an indigenous farming and maritime community here that were taken over by Group A, and then they're now under siege by an empire. So there's a lot of different factions here. But again, we went over the climate biome. Resources are going to be obviously fish, iron, and then also there's like sapphires here, which is interesting. And then the history we have for these islands is that we have a volcanic island with an indigenous farming maritime community. Island was taken over by Group A, aka United. Empire then places imperialistic control over Group A. Group A has started a revolution against the Empire, and here's where our story begins. So, this is a siege story, right? So it's going to be very world building driven, right? This one was more, we took a place that inspired an idea versus had an idea and then found a place to put it, right? So this is sort of like a middle ground option, right? It's going to be just medium scale. It's on an island. It's a siege, so it's within some sort of fortress or some sort of constrained area. Might be the full island. We'd have to get into the world building there. For the society, we know we need to have the native indigenous farming maritime community which is going to have some magical connections to the island that we'll get to. And then there's obviously their conquerors who have settled and built up on this island, and then there's the imperialistic empire. So I think we have that's a copy from the history. Yeah. And then we know the island is heavily deforested, it's on top of an estuary, was a largely maritime culture. Great. So for the main plot, the Empire has come to lay siege on A's capital, where A has subjugated the indigenous population. There's a rebellion from within the city to start a second revolution to take the central government. There's going to be like a siege with a naval blockade. There's going to be conflict between like holding out versus capitalism or capitulation. Conflict between holding out versus capitulation. Wow. Diseases, running out of supplies, starvation, desperation. Those are all going to be conflicts in the story. There's going to be lava tubes connecting the city's admin districts to the heart of all the magic in the volcano, left over from the indigenous settlements. We are going to follow a nobody in the city during the siege and their sabotaging efforts. So we really just have the one main character, an insignificant low-level bureaucrat or native. Again, they're insignificant, they're a nobody, seemingly, don't have a lot of power, and they have a grudge against everyone, right? Oppressors that built the city and took their native land, and imperialistic invaders that are trying to conquer it, right? So they sort of don't care who wins, they hate both of them. So they're going to be sabotaging everyone until having to decide whether to use the volcano's magic to destroy them all. So that internal arc must grapple with the anger and resentment against oppressors and decide whether to help a side or destroy them all. Goal and outcome is they have to determine the fate of the siege. So orgs and other players include like indigenous folk originally from the island, revolutionaries that originally held the city, the first conquerors, the sieging empire, and then the popular rebellion or coup from within the city. So that's definitely kind of complicated, right? But the scale is obviously very different. The type of society we need to build is very different. And we don't really know much based off this story about the actual, like, first conquerors or the empire themselves, right? We know very little about the actual society here, which is going to come more from the world building, right? We're going to world build it out and then kind of shape the story around that. But then our fourth one, which is the new surprise and which is entirely world building, no story yet. The story will come later. We have, unsurprisingly, Glaciers and Alpacas. I mostly felt like we needed a world that was a little bit more polar, because we had two that were like rainforest and one that was like CFB, and it felt a little bit too restrictive in our options, and I wanted something that was a little bit different, both when we get to like regional map building and also just for things to consider here. So I kind of looked around for a place that I thought had like an interesting starting point. So we're going to be up in Thurston again. I think this is still Thurston. Right up here, there's like mountains up here. So between the mountains and this like glaciated archipelago, it's going to be deep in a taiga forest. It's going to be DWC, DWD, monsoon-influenced subarctic climate. Let's see, what other notes do I have? Resources are like gold, wood, lots of iron. There's reindeer and alpacas in the highlands, which they're totally going to be alpaca herders. Like, that's going to be a big thing, because glaciers and alpacas, you all know me. I love glaciers and alpacas. So the history here was there used to be two dominant empires here in fierce competition for hundreds of years. While they were distracted fighting each other, the original inhabitants started to fight back for their homeland. The natives were defeated, pushed back into the mountains, and one empire took control of the gold mines, which are like more in the highlands, midlands, the foothills. And then the other one kind of pushed more south and rules the sea routes and the trade. And we're going to focus on the region with that like gold dominating empire and the original inhabitants that were forced to retreat into the mountains, which are going to be our alpaca herders. So yeah, I mean, that's literally all we have here, as a starting point. So as we go through, the different stages of cultural and society building, we're going to kind of just go with what we think comes naturally here, what we think makes sense for the world, kind of build it out, and then eventually like we'll kind of figure out what kind of story would be best to sit here. And so that's kind of all we have for the scenarios. I have to decide, and I'd be very curious what your thoughts are. Obviously, we're pushing forward with cultural, societal world building. I think the next thing we need to talk about is basically like almost like government type focus, high level governments. We need to focus on like stratification and figuring out those like class systems and inequality bases and stuff like that for these different societies. And then I do want to get into like food culture, which is less relevant for all of these things. And as much as I want to do food culture, I may have to push that back because the whole big thing that I like about food culture is that it tells you so much about the culture. And until we have the culture, maybe we can't actually do that. So that may have to change. But the other thing that I can do is the actual like regional world building, which here we have a lot of different scales, right? Glaciers and Alpacas, we can do larger scale, right? Because we'll need to figure out where to set it. For this one, we really only need to do the island. For the demon made me do it. We'll need to do this whole region, so that's a larger scale one. And then for Cyberpunk 1477, we're within like, maybe within one city, but we can build around that a little bit too. So that kind of gives us some different scales with which to do some regional world building, and we have some different types of, we have like an island, we have a rainforest, we have something that's a little bit more temperate, but like was glaciated before, and then we have like proper subarctic, tundra in the mountains kind of, or not tundra, taiga, in the mountains kind of thing. So we have a lot of variation here that we can play with. So my question for you is, do you want me to start interspersing that regional world building? I think it might make sense to start building out those maps and kind of be working on both of these guides in parallel. I don't know if that would be weird or the right approach, because that's normally how I do it at this stage, right? Like I'm doing all the mapping around the same time that I'm doing all this other stuff. So think about that. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of these stories, and if you have any other like thoughts and ideas to add to it. But yeah, we have our 4 scenarios to move forward with. Thank you. What am I supposed to say? I don't know. Like, comment, subscribe. It's great. We have the World Building Festival coming up in less than a month now, so check that out if you haven't already. I also have a Patreon, which is cool. Yeah, thanks, and I will see you in the next one.